Have you ever noticed that when you're stressed, your memory is worse? And then upon realizing your memory is declining, you stress out even more, thinking the worst and having a panic attack every time you can't answer the question, what did you do last weekend? Well, what if the solution was as simple as a cold shower? My next guest is someone who suffered for years from what he calls the modern human condition. Cycles of stress and anxiety burning our minds and bodies, but accepted as, just the way it is. He found relief and regained his passion for life in the cold. He became one of the first American certified Wim Hof instructors, published 2 books, has a successful YouTube channel, and conducts cold exposure training. You may recognize him from episode 61, where we talked about beginner breathwork techniques. Today, he's going to share practical ways cold therapy might help you chill out and remember some shit. Enthusiastic biohacker, practical ice dude, lumberjack breathworker, Jesse Coomer. Thanks for coming back.
Thanks so much for having me. It's good to be back.
Does anyone else call you a lumberjack?
I get it now and then. It's always a surprise, and I like it though. I'm always happy to hear it.
Well, I just love the paradox of what you do compared to I'm from the Midwest too, so that, what masculinity is considered in the Midwest, and it's not usually breath work. Although the cold therapy stuff, that is pretty ancestrally spot on, Northern Europe.
Yes. I will say it's funny because you will see people of all different walks of life getting in the cold, and it's really hard to predict who's going to take to it really simply and easily and who's going to just really resist. But yeah, so the lumberjacks are not always taking well to the cold, but hey, this one, I got into it.
Well, yes, I do want to do a safety disclaimer, but I have to tell you that I am one of the people that hates the cold. It makes me so pissed off, Jesse. It makes me say bad words. It makes me say bad words. Why? Why does that happen to some people?
Oh, yes. We're going to talk about that. Let me do the quick disclaimer.
Yes, please do.
And then I will tell you why it makes you say bad words.
Okay.
So the quick disclaimer for cold exposure therapy. Cold exposure therapy is safe and effective for most individuals, as long as you're practicing within reason. And we'll be talking a little bit about my book, which gives you some great parameters as far as how to practice safely. But the quick disclaimer is that cold exposure therapy is not for people who have epilepsy, uncontrolled high blood pressure, who are pregnant, or nursing. For everyone else, practice safely.
That's a pretty broad scope of people who can practice that, actually. I'm surprised by that. Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry for not giving more people the excuse not to.
Damn it.
People are like, okay, let me listen. Let me listen really closely. But yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. Okay, so why does cold piss me off?
Yeah, cold pisses you off because it activates elements within your brain that are specifically what we consider noxious. So
not obnoxious.
Well, exactly, but even worse, just completely the worst possible anxiety that you can feel. There's 2 major things that cause you to feel those 2 things. One is the feeling of suffocation, okay? The other is the feeling of cold. And what happens with the cold is that it causes your brain, so there's a part of your brain called the locus coeruleus. And when a person is exposed to cold, whether it is through cold weather or any kind of cold exposure, the locus coeruleus will secrete a neurochemical called norepinephrine. Now, norepinephrine is something that we do need. It's helpful for attention, for learning, inflammation. It's incredibly powerful anti-inflammatory properties of norepinephrine. However, it is also experienced as extreme anxiety, in many cases, overwhelming extreme anxiety. It is literally your body saying, what the hell are you doing? You're putting me in this thing that is going to kill me. Why? And then it just kind of works it out into a long line of expletives that you'll feel in the shower.
That was such a good explanation. Okay.
Well, I've had a lot of time to think about it. It was not something that I myself naturally took to. I always talk about my very first cold shower. I got into the cold shower. I turned the knob on the thing. It was straight up cold. And the so I always say that it was a lot like in the cartoons where the skin and the skeleton separate, you know, and that's how it felt. And you're getting an enormous amount of information on the largest organ in your body, your skin. And there's a lot of deconditioning that we modern humans have had. And one is that, believe it or not, our species adapted to live in extreme hot and extreme cold. And so our skin has an amazing capacity to deal with these things, but we've let it atrophy. And I'm not trying to guilt trip anybody here, but the fact that, we are constantly in temperature controlled buildings and cars and things like that ultimately has led to an enormous amount of our natural physiology completely not being used. And so it's just like whenever you go into the gym. I love going to the gym. I'm a fitness enthusiast, personal trainer. I train athletes and all this stuff. So I enjoy it now. But I remember the first time. I lived most of my life as an unhealthy person. When I was in grad school, my roommate said, "Hey man, let's go to the gym and be fun." I'm like, I was actually offended. I was like, how is this a thing that people do on purpose and people do it for fun? And because the first time you go to the gym, it's terrible. Oh my God, I feel so uncomfortable and all these things. And after a while, you're like, wow, this is really a great thing, and I love to do it, and maybe I even crave it. But that's because the first time you go to the gym, you're experiencing all the effects of all the atrophy of all those muscles you've never used, and you're just like, oh my God, it's just too much. And it's very similar when it comes to extreme cold, especially. It's the same with extreme heat. You can also get norepinephrine release, but the cold, man, it's fast and it's consistent.
Okay. So, what kind of results, benefit wise, did you experience when you first started your cold therapy practice?
Cold therapy was something that I initially experienced immune system benefits. And that was, I think, for most people start in that realm. They're either doing it to improve their inflammation, so they're trying to reduce inflammation, or they're trying to do it because they've heard that it is somehow beneficial for our immune system. Now, this is something that I did initially, and I did notice that especially my seasonal allergies were alleviated
Really?
whenever it was amazing. And this this is something that I was like, what is it exactly that's happening here? Because I was doing breath work, I was doing fitness, I was doing all these other kind of new things. I was really making a lot of changes in my body and mind. And it wasn't until I stopped doing cold training that my allergies returned. And I've had this happen a few times over the years where I have to stop doing cold training for whatever reason. And the allergies would always come back. I get back into cold training, it'd always go away. And that has been a huge thing for me. But I think the biggest thing that I see in myself, and also as I've developed my own practices with cold training, after I've done my own research, I've done a lot of development in how I train my clients, is psychological resilience. So when it comes to stress, anxiety, all these things, all these attributes of life that we face, and we're living, like you mentioned, I called the modern human condition. Why is it in a time whenever we actually have the fewest like life and death stressors and things that are likely to kill us and things like that? Why is it that we're more stressed now than any other time in history, feeling more anxiety? And so one of the things that, and I could go all day on that, but one of the things that I've seen with cold training is this. Like I said, norepinephrine, we experience the presence of elevated norepinephrine in our brain as anxiety. So when you voluntarily put yourself into the cold, you're doing what we call stress inoculation. I like to call it that, at least. And there's a lot
I
of
like
trainers that
it.
are calling it that. I like it, right? It's basically you're giving yourself a little bit of that thing, and you're doing it on purpose. And you can start to make friends with it in a way. It's never going to completely go away, because you talk to cold trainers. Yes, man, you see like a cold trainer has been, practicing regularly. They get into the cold, you don't even notice their face expression. It's all the same. But that's after they've inoculated themselves. That's after they've really gotten used to that spike of norepinephrine. And then later on in your regular daily life, someone cuts you off in traffic, or someone is, a total jerk at the office or whatever. And that same chemical reaction happens in your brain, because that's what happens. We get into that fight or flight. We start getting the norepinephrine. Well, normally that's what makes us go crazy, and we say stupid things, and I can't think. And then that's, like for the next 3 days, you're thinking about what you should have said.
Right, of
I don't know if
course.
anybody else is out there,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Fake
Oh
fights in the
man.
shower.
Oh,
I
exactly.
win, but
Yes,
not so
but you
much in real
never
life.
win. You never win because for some reason, then you're like, oh, there's another thing I should have said, and then another. But
Exactly.
ultimately, what happens is you train yourself to be used to that heightened level of norepinephrine.
And that's
And
different than like the daily, like lower grade chronic stress. Cause you would think like we have enough stress in our life. I mean, it's
mhm,
2022. We're on the brink of World War III and a recession
yeah,
and all this stuff. Like, don't
yeah,
we have enough stress? So this seems a little counterintuitive.
I know. And this is one of those interesting things. So um, I am a recovering English professor. And as such, I'm full of a lot of quasi useless knowledge. And one of the things is I'm always fascinated. I'm a nerd on the English language and just on language in general. We have in our language, and many languages actually have this, the phrase, take it with a grain of salt, right? We've all heard this phrase. Well, where did it come from? And no, it's interesting. So we've all heard of Julius Caesar. Well, there was a time when Julius Caesar, he's one of the greatest generals in all of Roman history, probably the greatest general in all of Roman history. And the sad thing is, he was also general at the same time as this general called Pompey, who should have been the greatest general in Roman history. But then there was that Julius Caesar guy. Well, they were constantly trying to kill each other. And so Pompey believed that he could become immune to poison if he took a little bit of poison, but took it with a pinch of salt. And this is where we get that phrase from, take it with a pinch of salt. And he believed that that pinch of salt helped him somehow become more resilient to that poison. Well, he actually did become to where certain poisons would not have the same effect. And the grain of salt had nothing to do with it. But what happened is he had discovered by accident hormesis. So the process of hormesis is that if you stress yourself the right amount, you become stronger. So you have to stress yourself some. If you stress yourself too much, you experience damage or death in Pompey's case. But if you give yourself the right amount of stress, you actually become more resilient and you become stronger. So there's some stressors that allow us to become stronger, and the cold is one of them. Heat is another one. Exercise is another one. There's a long list of things that we have figured out over the years. If you give yourself the right amount, too much will hurt you. I mean, and this is one of the reasons why I wrote my book, A Practical Guide to Cold Training, is because so many people were getting into the cold training. They're like, I love cold training. I'm just going to go and do it. And they see all this stuff going on TV and on the internet. And they're like, I guess I always thought the cold was bad, but I guess it's good. And if it's good, then I want a lot of it. Right. And then I would see all these people and they're going to the hospital. They're having like toes amputated. I'm like, oh my God, guys, this is insane. And it's all because we misunderstand the process of hormesis. You got to have more than a little. So you have to have enough so that the physiology will respond. You have to challenge it. In this case, the cold has to challenge the homeostatic state of the body. So it has to challenge the inner temperature. But if you go much beyond that, much beyond a challenge, then you can get into the danger zone. And so this is why this kind of stress is what we might consider a eustress or positive stressor, as opposed to chronic stress. And what we find is that if you give yourself these kinds of stressors, you're more resilient to those other stressors that we might consider the things that cause us chronic stress throughout life, like people in traffic every day, or the threat of, I guess, World War III.
I know. I don't want to think about that. But okay, that's really interesting. I do want to talk about becoming cold adapted in a second. So
Yeah.
we'll put a little mental
All right.
placeholder
Asterisks.
on that
There
one.
it
Yeah.
is. Gotcha.
But I wanted to ask you about what makes cold therapy special for memory enhancement specifically, because when I was reading your book, I was really surprised to hear that benefit. And I polled about a dozen people with maybe like 8 benefits from cold
Hmm.
therapy. Overwhelmingly, everyone wanted to know about this memory enhancement. So, how does it work?
Yeah. So this is interesting. So it comes back to that one chemical that I've been talking about, norepinephrine. So this is so interesting about norepinephrine. And the same thing that helps us retain memories is also the same thing that can traumatize us. So norepinephrine, the purpose of the locus coeruleus secreting norepinephrine is to enhance our senses, is to improve attentiveness. And if you look at most of human history was hunter-gatherer society, the vast majority. And so when we became under a stressed situation, our autonomic nervous system would kick in. It would go into a heightened state of more like a fight or flight, is what we oftentimes call it, but really we should call it more just a sympathetic dominant state. So there's a lot of different stages there. But what happens is when you start that process, you have norepinephrine increases. So the norepinephrine will increase to help you to be more attentive to the situation, more alert. Now, this is great for our ancestors who wanted to see their enemy or their, prey, or the jungle cat or whatever before it saw them, hear before it heard them, and smell it before they could be smelled. And so this has always been actually part of our species, a kind of a superpower, is that it will make us more aware in the present moment. It puts us more here. Now, that is great. And that's one of the things where if you have low norepinephrine, you're going to notice that, especially when you start practicing cold training, it'll bring it up to a very healthy level. Now, when you have elevated levels of norepinephrine that are very, very high, ultimately we know that as anxiety. And if it goes high enough, you have an anxiety attack. And if it goes high enough, you may be experiencing trauma. And it may be just ingrained in your memory for the rest of your life. I mean, there's a lot of negative side effects. It depends on the amount. But the interesting thing when it comes to cold training is that it boosts your norepinephrine. It gives you a nice boost. It's consistent. So for instance, you can, on your very first cold shower, if you were to take that same duration and that same temperature cold shower, it'll be the exact same dose of norepinephrine on the first time as on your 300th time or your 4,000th time. And that is something that we've seen in the studies. And I include that specific study in the book, which makes it a really great way to regulate. Okay, I can regulate my dosage, and I'm not just constantly guessing. And so, for instance, so how can we use this in everyday life? So typically, most of us take a shower in the mornings. Some people do it in the evenings. But if you take your shower in the mornings, it's especially a great opportunity to add some cold water to the end, heighten the level of norepinephrine to the point where you're far more alert. My little boy, before he goes to school, now I'm a weird dad, probably. Well, not probably. Why did I say probably? Okay.
Why?
I'm a weird dad, period, is what I should have said. So I'm teaching my boy all of these weird biohacking things. But one of the things that I have been very happy is that, whenever we were kids, we were like, no, I'm not cold, right?
Yeah.
But then hey, no, you put on this coat no matter what. And it's funny how far back the belief that being cold makes you sick goes. It goes back
Yeah.
to the Middle Ages and the four humors. And I mean, it's amazing how far that goes in Western medicine, which we could have a whole episode on that.
Totally.
But but really, when we're kids, we haven't we haven't been, I guess, we haven't
Indoctrinated.
used, yeah, well, in so many ways,
I know.
right?
Yeah.
And one of the things, we're listening to our body and we're saying, I'm not really cold. And they're not. And I remember back then, I wasn't lying when I said I'm not cold. I just really wasn't cold. And so what I do is I allow my son to hold his coat as he goes in, even when it's cold. And of course, the officer and the principal, and they're always out there and like, aren't you cold? Well, put on that coat. And I get to feel the gaze is like, man, this guy doesn't care about his kid. But what I'm doing, what I'm doing is I'm priming my son. I'm allowing him to get a nice little norepinephrine spike. Nothing major. It's not like I'm saying, okay, walk a mile uphill in the snow, right? Like I guess apparently all of our parents did,
I
right?
mean, I
But
did
I'm not saying
literally walked uphill
it
this
was
snow.
uphill both ways,
Well, oh, okay, maybe
right?
not. Yeah, yeah.
but the
Nebraska's a
idea
crazy
is
place. What can I say,
that's true. Yeah, it's an amazing geography.
It's amazing. The topography is exceptional.
But ultimately, what I'm doing is I'm allowing my son to get a nice little bump of norepinephrine before he goes to school to increase his alertness and attentiveness so that whatever it is that he sees, you're going to pay better attention to it. And it's going to be retained in your memory at a higher level than if you had a lower level of norepinephrine. If we go too high, then we've experienced it as anxiety and it blocks our memory and it blocks our focus. So for instance, we all remember that one time you sat down at a test, you studied, but then your mind went blank. That was an extreme level of norepinephrine that was coming into your brain and it caused you to have more anxiety, which got in the way of your focus. But for most of us, we have lower levels of norepinephrine, and a nice little bump in the morning is going to be exactly what you want to do to improve your memory and your overall retention.
Okay, that checks out. I'm starting to
Mm-hmm.
see how this might work. I feel like the audience might be slightly distracted from the yeah buts. So this might
The
be a good
habits.
time to circle back to safety because they might be saying,
Mm.
yeah, but what about nerve damage? Yeah, but what about hypothermia? Yeah, but what about, I don't know, whatever. So
Hmm.
how do you not do cold training other than the
So
extreme examples you already gave?
yeah. So cold training is an interesting thing. It is a safe way to train your mind and body as long as you practice it safely. So it is just like everything else that you do for health. You know, you can. It's the weirdest thing. You can drink too much water and die. You can drink not enough water and die. It's the happy middle, right? It's knowing what's appropriate. So in my book, I detail a lot of this, and this is something that just quite simply put for your audience. So there's the comfort zone, and that's the area where we're not getting any benefits. We're not really pushing ourselves. Then we have what we call the shock zone. So that's the initial shock that you get when you turn on the cold water or whatever. That's pretty short, but that's when your physiology saying, "Hey, this is a lethal force that if I stay in it too long, I will die." And it's not lying. It's not lying to you, okay? Because if you stay in cold water or the cold air long enough, it can cause you to have hypothermia and die. So, but now for most people, even if it's just like 70 degrees, they're gonna be, oh, that's so cold,
Right.
and that's because you've had so much atrophy to your to yourself that, and I would poke you a little bit and say, hey, toughen up a little bit. But having said that, we have an initial shock, and eventually that will pass. Now, it's not like suddenly you're no longer cold. Okay, so it's always going to be cold. It's just how are you dealing with it? So usually that shock will last maybe 30 seconds, sometimes a whole minute. And man, that feels like a long minute, right? But eventually you'll get yourself under control. You're able to stay okay, I'm relaxed. I'm feeling okay. And then we're in what we call the training zone. Now, first of all, you've already received benefits if you stayed in a cold shower for 30 seconds or a minute.
And is there
There's
like a certain
a really
threshold of temperature that like, okay, has to be this cold to receive a benefit?
typically, so yes and no. So typically we look for something that should be right around 60 or colder. So approximately 60 Fahrenheit, in that neighborhood or colder to receive what we might consider the benefits of cold training. However, if all you can do that day is 70, and you were able to get through 30 seconds to a minute of 70, I call that a huge win. And a way I always will explain it to people is, how much weight do you need to lift in order for it to be beneficial, right? So you might have a person going in there and it's a huge challenge to lift 5 pounds. That's enough weight. That's appropriate. You shouldn't be going to 20 pounds or 30 pounds. That will likely overstress you. Now, having said that, if I go in, I need to lift a little bit more than 5 pounds to get any kind of benefit, just because of where I am on that spectrum, because I've conditioned myself so that to get some more benefits, okay, I'm going to go a little bit more. Now, the nice thing about the cold is eventually you get to the point where you don't need to go any colder. You don't need to go any longer, because again, that norepinephrine release is the same every single time. You don't build a tolerance to it. But let's suppose the average person, you get in the cold shower, you've moved past the comfort zone, you've gotten through the shock. There's a little time we call the training zone. Now, this is in a cold shower, you don't stand as much chance for negative side effects, except for instance, if you live where I live, in the bitter, bitter cold. Okay. So the coming months of January, February, March, those months are whenever the tap water is at its coldest. And yeah, you'll want to kind of watch how you feel. But ultimately, we always want to get out of the cold feeling strong. We never want to wait until, oh, I just can't go any longer, I'm shivering. And, we always want to stay in what we call the training zone, because if we get past that, we get to the danger zone. Now, you're not going to get, I get a lot of questions about frostbite. The place where you're going to get frostbite is outdoor in the air. That's the place to get frostbite. If you're doing straight up snow walking, you might get frostbite or chilblains. If you're doing the cold air stuff, that's where you're going to get the frostbite. If you're in the water, you're generally, I've never heard of a person getting frostbite in water. And that's just because for frostbite to happen, you need to go a lot colder than what water in its liquid state will go. Now, having said that, the main danger for cold water therapy is hypothermia. And in my book, I describe kind of how you can feel your way through. But I always say to err on the side of caution. Remember, this is a practice, it's not a performance. So if you're the kind of person that goes into an all-you-can-eat buffet and you're like trying to, you know what I mean? And you're trying to teach them a lesson like, only $10? I'll eat $20 worth. That is first of all, it's a terrible thing. Just don't do that on any level, right? It's a terrible thing for that. It's a terrible thing in the ice bath. And whenever you take an ice bath, it's a lot of work oftentimes. And you're like, well, I'm only going to be in for a minute and a half or 2 minutes. I feel like I'm going to try to get my ice bath's worth. Right.
Right. Because
So I
ice
get a
is
lot of,
expensive, and then you buy the
yeah,
ice.
you paid like 20,
Yeah.
$30 and you only have 2 minutes.
Yeah. I can see that.
So a lot of times, and I've done it before, you're like, nah, I'm going to get a real good one in. And you stay in too long and you get out and you're feeling shivering and stuff like that. And what can happen is a few things. One, you can have hypothermia, but what's more likely to happen is the thing we call after drop. And that's where the blood that was your body was really trying to keep that cooler blood on the surface of your skin. Eventually, it needs to circulate that blood. So it actually stops the circulation on the surface of your skin for a little while, but eventually it has to pulse. And when it pulses, some of that blood goes back to your core and it can cool your core body temperature. And I will just say, as a person who's experienced it many times, it is a miserable experience. And it's very worthwhile to try to avoid. Now, having said that, everybody who's a serious cold trainer eventually will feel it, because we all, at one point or another, we mismanage our thoughts or we're like, I'm just going to stay in a little longer. But ultimately, that is a place where it's like, okay, I need to really be careful. So I go through some protocols in my book on all the different ways you can get in, for instance, okay, ice chest, or if you're going to go outside to a cold beach and just do a natural thing, all the things that I wish someone would have told me to think about as far as planning ahead. And I even talked to record holders and people that have gone way far beyond what I've ever tried. What are some tips? What are the things that you would tell me if I were going to try to attempt these feats? And ultimately, the most important thing is to be prepared, and to always err on the side of caution. I would rather I'd rather go out and not go to the extreme edge of my cold and then go the next day rather than, oh my God, I pushed myself way too far. And that brings me to one of the biggest reasons. If you want to make progress in cold training, it's slow and it's not consistent. You're going to feel weird. Like one day you're like super strong, the next day you're super weak, and the next day you're super weak, and then you're strong, and then you're weak. So you really want to learn the sense of introspection, which is ultimately learning, how do I feel? And never push yourself to the edge. And that's something that, especially if you're into fitness, you're like, I always get 12 reps on this weight.
Right.
Never apply that. So much, you can apply a lot of weight, or gym like knowledge to the cold, but never apply, I always do this much, this many times. Go into it fresh every single time, and then get out before you start to feel weak. And if you feel weak that day, just say, okay, I gave it a shot.
That is
I'm not going to
so
let my
opposite
pride.
of what I thought. Like I
Yeah.
thought, because I thought being cold adapted meant like, okay, you take a shower at, you get your little laser pointer thermometer and you take your shower at 65 degrees for 1 minute or whatever. And then the next day well, maybe not the next day, but like the week after, you take it at 5 degrees cooler and for 1 minute. And then
Mm-hmm.
once like that's no big deal, then maybe you go longer. And I thought it was like this gradual, very calculated buildup, but you're saying it's a more intuitive process.
Yeah, I would say it's more like how the seasons change, and of course, here in the Midwest, we have all four seasons. It'll go up and down, but it'll trend to a certain colder or warmer, right?
Hmm.
That's kind of how you're going to have it happen for you. You're going to have a different experience every day, but it will trend for longer and colder. Um,
Oh,
and in my
okay.
book, but so one day you're going to be super weak, you just can't do it. And it's harder to accept that the longer you've been doing it. And then, of course, this goes back to what we talked about at the beginning. There's the pictures of masculinity and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
So you get this machismo attitude. You got all the bros, and you're like, hey man, I go in there for like all the minutes, man. And you see people get really humbled. And it is the most humbling element that I've ever worked with, is the cold. Because if you go out there and you try to be a competitive cold person, like, I'm going to out cold everybody. Yeah, one day you might really be strong and you're going to think, oh, it's all me and I'm just great. But if you do that enough times, you will be humbled. Or you'll be smart and you'll say, okay, guys, I'm going to get out. And if those people are serious cold trainers, they're not going to think less of you, because they've had, experiences just the same. And it's really important to keep that humility, and to never look at it as, I am in charge of the cold. The cold is the stronger out of you versus it. It will always win. You are incredibly strong too. And that's one of the things we learn when we do cold training. Wow, it feels like a superpower after a while. It's
Yeah.
like everybody else is like, no way I could ever do that. It's like, yeah, we're all capable of doing this. This is actually and the thing is, cold training doesn't make you super human, or like, it doesn't necessarily add extra health. What it does is it restores the health that humans naturally should have, just like exercise or just like proper diet. It's not like it makes you healthier than a human. It brings you back to the where a human should be, based off of our physiology. It's strange, but our physiology, in many ways, it relies on certain stressors to keep it healthy.
I
And
like
it
that.
doesn't seem intuitive, but it does. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if I could achieve dissolution of ego and remember things, okay, I'm kind of interested, Jesse. So as we wrap up, like, what are some practical, like, okay, next steps? Like, do you have to do it every day? Otherwise, it's useless. Is the shower the best way? Your book is very helpful. I will say it was like I was thinking a question and then the next paragraph answered that question. I really liked it. Fist pump for the book. But
All
for our
right.
listeners who haven't already read the book, what are just like a couple of things that they could keep in mind to start implementing this? And actually, and like how soon would they see results? I think that's something that people would want to know.
That's a great question. So results will vary. So I hate saying that and I hate hearing it even more, right?
No
Results
fun.
vary. So I know a lot of people that they are like, Jesse, I heard you don't have to worry about those allergies anymore. And here I am a year into my practice and I still have to take allergy medicine. I'm sorry. It helped me. It didn't help them in the same exact way. However, you should typically start to see some progress and some what I would consider some noticeable results within a couple weeks.
Oh,
You're also going to notice that within even just the first week or two, you're going to notice your resiliency is improving quite quickly. And that is as long as you're going in with the right mindset. As with anything, you have to have the right mindset. You have to frame it the right way. And so I'm gonna give everyone my number one tip. I don't remember if I put it in the book, but if it's not in the book, it's coming in the new revision that I'm going to be publishing soon. Um, I would highly recommend finding a playlist of cheesy music that makes you laugh and giggle. Okay, so something like for some people it'll be like classic rock or for me it was 80s rock and 90s rap. And I would find a song that I knew the amount of time, and of course California Love, if it's 4 minutes 20 seconds, get it.
I
And
got
so
it.
I always remembered that. And so in the shower I would remember, okay, I'm going to play California Love, and I know that when it's over I've been in for 4 minutes 20 seconds. And so and also I'm singing along, I'm making it fun. That's what you want to try to do. Try to make it into a fun, pleasurable thing. Don't look at it as punishment. It's just like everything else in life. If you approach it like it's punishment, it's going to be awful. But when you approach it with some fun, oh my God. And then you get out and you're like, have fun with it, laugh at yourself, dance in the shower, and just have a great time. And you're going to see results faster. And I know it's like, oh, I just care about the science and this and that. Let me tell you this, guys. Psychology of the practitioner determines an enormous amount of the result. So you go in there, you're like, I'm going to listen to these cheesy songs. I'm going to sing along. I'm going to make it into a party. This is my cold party. Then you get out. You're already having a great time. You're seeing results far faster. And then before you know it, you're like, wow, I'm not as stressed as I normally am in everyday life. Man, stress isn't really hitting me like it used to. Wow. And before you know it, you're going to see a lot of results. So don't sweat all the tiny details and things like that. There's a lot of podcasts and a lot of people I know that want all the tiny little details. Give me X number of this, because we're so addicted to, milligrams in pills. We just think everything,
Yes.
that's how we think about
Yes.
everything. So it's
Prescriptive.
got to be like that.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's got to be exact, these things. Think less about that and more about how much fun you're having in the cold. And can I be crazy and go a little longer? Or can I be crazy and go a little colder? Have fun with that. And then you're going to have far more better results than all these people who are trying to, use an equation and count this many things or that things. Those are not bad things to do. And in my book, I talk a little, I give you some reference points as far as temperatures and times. But the biggest thing, if you want to see results, make it fun.
I love that. I think I'm going to sing Baby Shark. Can you just see that? Like Baby Shark. Do, 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 do. Baby Shark. Do, do, do,
Actually,
do.
at some of my workshops, because I'll do a Wim Hof method workshop, and I'll have people they'll sing Baby Shark in the ice bath, and then they have to put a bag of ice and dump it on their heads sometimes.
Okay,
So there's all
well,
kinds of fun you can
I'll
have
just
in
be sticking with the shower. Thank you very much, sir. Tell people where they can find you, where they can buy your book, and engage in social media land with you.
Yes, yes. If you would like to find, first of all, if you'd like to find any of the things that I do, you can go to jessecoomer.com. That is JESSECOOMER.com. and find out all the different workshops, retreats, etc. that I do throughout the year. All of my books are available on that website as well, and you can just click on the link to my books. If you have a older copy of my ebook, A Practical Guide to Cold Training, when I publish my revised copy this in 2023, should come out in March. You'll get a free updated copy of the ebook, so you can get that now. So you can be reading up on it, and then you can get the updated copy, or you can wait to buy it on Amazon, Audible, and all those other places as well. I'm on YouTube. If you just search for Jesse Coomer on YouTube, I have all kinds of content there, and on Instagram, I am at Jesse Coomer Breath.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was amazing.
Always a fun time to be here.
Hey, you're still here. That's awesome. I hope to see you next week too. I talk with the most interesting people that you've probably never heard of. Most of them are paradoxical and bring an opportunity for you to grow as a person. So if you like bright, meaningful entertainment, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications.